This comes off of 1985, where they're doing 200K. Right? Let's just talk about the revenue chart. 85, 200K to 95 million to 93, 40 million. This is explosive growth.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Skippy and Doogles Show. Today we are talking about a verbal history of Deckers Outdoor Corporation, the most fascinating shoe brand you've ever heard of. Blockbuster
Never heard
after
of.
Blockbuster. Never heard of. Good point. Blockbuster after Blockbuster. This is part one of our breakdown. There will be part two coming next week. Here we're going to cover the first 30 years of this company's history from 1973 to 2003. Doogles, tell us what we're going to talk about today.
This is a 50-year overnight success. It's wild. Absolutely wild. You'll hear the story in a moment. There's some takeaways we want to cover. First thing that pops into mind for me is that they build authentic brands, and all their brands have this premium tilt to it.
In addition to that, this 50-year overnight success, the first 30 years are about building the foundation for that, and a lot of that foundation is supplier and sales relationships that allow for future brands to take off like wildfire.
And they have this keen ability to be able to deeply understand their market, and they build this product market fit, and they do it within a niche audience. Like
one of the most key brands for the early history of this company is Teva adventure sandals, they're sometimes called. They had a partnership going back for years, but you'll hear it late in the episode. They formally acquire Teva and all its assets in 2002, which is a big foundational step for the stock to explode and enables the next success, which is what brand, Doogles?
And that brings us to Oprah. I love that you talked about the relationship component, because while it's not exactly like what you mentioned when you were talking about the sales relationships, them just being able to recognize, identify, and leverage premium relationships like Oprah talking about UGG in the early 21st century, huge catalyst for this organization.
My friends in the public relations community call that earned media, Doogles.
Ooh.
So strap in here. If you are interested in running shoes, this is the episode for you. If you're interested in sandals, if you're interested in surf bums, if you're interested in high fashion sheepskin boots with UGG, this is the episode for you. We hope you enjoy.
And we know you're interested in stocks, so it's also an episode for you.
I've done so much research on this company. Sorry to cut you off, but you sent me 135 sources, including 20 plus annual reports, and it seems like hundreds of, I guess only 100-ish articles going back to 1973. I now want to buy the stock, Doogles. Kind of. Not really. Kind of.
I mean, but a little bit. Before we get into the content, here's why we selected Deckers. And you may have never heard of this company, which is cool. Why we selected is we looked at the best performing stocks of the last 20 years through December of 2024. Keep that in mind, through December of 2024. Deckers is number 10. So we didn't pick number one or number two necessarily. We said, what are the companies that are on here that people don't talk about as often, that people probably have never heard the story of? And we want to bring that to you. Deckers is the maker of Teva, of UGG, of Simple, of Hoka, right? These are brands that you have heard of, but you've probably never heard of the parent. But you're a shoe aficionado, so you've heard of everything.
This is the most fascinating shoe company around in the past 30 years. They did, and we're going to walk you through the timeline, but what they did is they started with like a cult classic in Santa Barbara, and then they innovated with a bunch of acquisitions, but 3 incredibly key acquisitions where they owned like decades of the shoe fad happening in America and around the world.
Right.
And all of a sudden they have this fairly unique revenue model of shoes that no one knows is owned by the same company. And it makes me so keen to see like what the next acquisition is, because they've shown such a great ability to kind of look ahead and then build the brand for what's next in a way that's not like it's completely different than what Nike and Adidas are doing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what is the upstart that we can take? The Hoka acquisition, which we'll talk a bunch about. Hoka is such a tiny company. No one's ever heard of the thing.
That's right.
And now you can't walk anywhere in the Mountain West without seeing every third shoe be some sort of Hoka ugly nonsense, which we'll talk about that too, Douglas.
You can't walk in the Mountain West without wearing Hokas. Is what I've learned.
I can, let me tell you.
Okay. Well, I'm on like my 12th pair of Hokas. So we're in different camps there.
Yeah.
But that's exactly right. It's bringing niche products to global audiences. That is what they have been able to do over this time period. Now let's zoom back, because we're going to talk about how a company went from a $0 company to at the end of 2024, $30 billion market cap organization. And the most fascinating part to me is the fact that most of that $30 billion was built in the last 20 years. And by most, I mean about 30 billion of the $30 billion. Okay, here we go. Way back, 1973. So in 1973, you have two people, Doug and Carl, that graduated from UC Santa Barbara. That's University of California in Santa Barbara. That is Doug Otto and Carl Lobker. They graduate. Doug was big into surfing. Carl was a big volleyball player, but both into sports. And decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make us some flip-flops, because that's what people do when they are surfers. So Doug is the salesperson. Carl's the manufacturer. And Doug says, well, look, Carl, here's what I want to do. Okay, what I feel like doing with my life is going to Hawaii. So I'm going to go to Hawaii for a month and see what happens. Carl says, take this pair of flip-flops and see what you can do over there. Doug goes over to Hawaii, starts selling flip-flops. He's stapling little pieces of paper on telephone poles saying, if you like flip-flops, I have them. This is his sales strategy, going door to door to shops and saying, you got to try this flip-flop. Because most flip-flops at this point in time, people might not know, were like the equivalent of if you are on a boardwalk somewhere and you walk into one of those little dollar store type shops and pick up flip-flops and you buy the pair that's only going to last that day. That is what all flip-flops were at this point in time. So they had a higher quality flip-flop. So he's selling these things, and the Hawaiian people, they were like, they looked at the design, which was layered colors, and goes, oh, it's like Decas. It's like different decks. That's where the name of this organization came from, way back then. This is a lifestyle business. From 1973 to 1982, they just had a lifestyle business. Can we sell enough product just to live however we want to live? And they sold a few different things. One thing I found that was really interesting was in the 1970s, there was this alternative brand that was created called Styled Steer. And so they also started selling like handbags and wallets under this brand. It was just like a marketing company they created alongside Deckers. And they made it seem like it was two different companies. They were like, Styled Steer has partnered with Deckers, but they were actually just the same company. So what happens in 1982? That's what you're all asking. Because you said from 1973 to 1982, this is what was going on. What happened then? By this point, Doug, who was only operating off of commissions at this point. He basically said, I'm going to make commissions and I'm going to build on my equity stake depending on how much I sell. By this point, Doug Otto had built up to owning half of Deckers. So it was a 50-50 relationship in 1982. And Doug said, Carl, I'm going to buy you out. So he bought out Carl for the other 50%. Carl went on to successfully run this other company that his wife had founded called QAD. It was an ERP software company, something completely different. So Carl went off, did that, was successful. But in 1982, Doug bought him out. And how coincidental that also in 1982, there was this geophysicist turned river guide. I mean,
okay, hold on. You're already to Teva? I say Teva. How do you say Teva? I know some people say Teva.
Yeah,
it's not Teva, it's Teva. I grew up in the river rafting part of the United States. Anyway, but we'll get there. I want to take a pause. I want to talk about some of these things you talked about that are so incredible. So one,
let's do it.
Who hasn't wanted to start a flip-flop business? Who hasn't? There's a theme. I'm obviously biased. There's a theme with this entire story, and that's that surfers rule the world, right? The dudes at UC Santa Barbara just wanted, to your point, they just wanted to hang out on the beach. And it turns out that Doug was a pretty gifted salesperson, okay? This equity acquisition approach that he took, I think it was very intentional on his part. I think he realized what he had and that he could turn this into something much bigger. Would you agree with that?
I don't think so. I disagree with that point. And mostly I disagree with it because not to jump ahead, but when we start getting to what the sales of this were, it was so small and it didn't become anything much bigger for so long. My speculation is this. Given what Carl went to go do, again, Carl went to go run an ERP software business that his wife had started. I think there was disagreement in what the company was. I think it was less about the size of the organization, and it was much more that Doug wanted to run this like surfer company. And Carl was like, I want to be a grown-up. That's what I think the difference was.
We all know how life works. People have families and stuff. Sometimes you need a bigger paycheck.
Yeah.
It's hard to be a surf bum forever. So, Carl aside, I find just the company foundation to be so fascinating because when in business school for me, we frequently would have debates about what is the purpose of a company. And 99% of people in the room will say to make money. And I will say to make money with a twist. Some people are like Doug Otto. Like some people want to have a great lifestyle, want to find a way to spend time on the beach. I think these are some of the most fascinating companies. And what I think is so fascinating about that, again, fast forwarding 50 years, is that this is one of the best performing stocks.
Yeah.
Since 1993, this is one of the absolute best performing stocks you can buy. I think that's why this is so fascinating. But I guess we can go to Teva now, even though I wanted to spend more time on the background. Is amazing. Like if you're listening, raise your hand if you remember the phenomenon that Teva created in the 80s and late 80s, really. Insane. That does not happen with this acquisition, Douglas.
That doesn't happen with what acquisition?
Without Deckers getting involved with Teva. Teva is founded by a river guide named Mark Thatcher, right?
A geophysicist turned river guide.
Okay. You're always better giving the background than me. A geophysicist. Douglas, why did he create a fairly unique sandal?
Yeah. So there's two parts of this. The reason I bring up the geophysicist element is because, and this also gets a little bit to what you were talking about with the reason that Doug buys out Carl. There are just these moments in life that happen, and everything maybe happens for a reason type situations. So I bring up geophysicist because Mark Thatcher was working in Houston for an oil company, and they laid him off. And what that gave him was a $20,000 severance check. And in his head, he also has this recurring thought that he's had since he did some river rafting before, that what you need when you're river rafting is a functional shoe, and people would wear flip-flops. And you also need something, just like a flip-flop, that will dry quickly. So it has to be open-toed, and you need it to be functional. So what if you can put a strap on the back of a flip-flop to make it such that it'll actually stay on your feet while you're river rafting? And so he's had this recurring thought, and now he has $20,000. And that's important. That's why the geophysicist element's important, is because he had $20,000. So now he says, I've got the money to try and put this recurring thought I have into action. So he creates this product, puts the strap on the back of the flip-flop, creates the sandal, which eventually becomes the beginning of the sports sandal movement. And river guides start picking it up in masses. What he does to get to Deckers is he starts partnering with some other organization that I couldn't figure out the name of, and he thought it was a partnership. They claimed it was just an employee relationship. So he starts working with them. He gets this thing patented in 1983, starts working with this organization. About a year in, they say, you're an employee. We actually own the rights to this Teva. You say Teva, I'll say Teva, potato for the rest of our lives. And he goes, no, bro. So he sues them. So at this point, he's lost his manufacturing and distribution arm. He needs to find another one. And he found a compatriot in Doug Otto and Deckers. So in 1985, Doug Otto, Deckers, and Mark Thatcher and Teva, in the midst of a lawsuit, become partners. Fascinating little start to this story.
And a lot of luck in there on all sides,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
So the funniest story about this is I remember the Teva craze. Again, in the Mountain West, close to the Colorado River, this was a thing in the late 80s. Like, it just took over. And I was telling my wife, I was giving her the breakdown of what we're talking about today, and I was like, do you remember Teva, like sports sandals? Like, no one had ever put a strap on sandals like that before. And she's like, dude, what about Jesus? Which I found to be a funny comment. So let's say no one in decades
millennia
was wearing. If you don't know what a original Teva sandal is, you have to Google it right now, because the River Guide piece is so perfect here, right? I picture Mark, and maybe this is just my head. I picture him rafting down the Colorado River, losing flip-flop after flip-flop, and just cursing. You just so frustrated. But he's not putting on shoes. He's not wearing stupid water socks. He invented the perfect thing for that application. What I don't think he knew, and I think maybe only Doug knew with his sales expertise, again, but I could be completely wrong here. This is why, Doug, come on the show. We'd love to talk to you. Is that this could turn into such like a fashionable, marketable trend that people wanted to maybe hike or hop in the river in their sandals. Because like you mentioned, think about in the 70s in Hawaii, the type of flip-flops that were available. People weren't doing anything but lounging at the beach in those things. And so Doug's first iteration of the Deckers surf sandal, I'm going to call it, was a big step forward. And of course he sees the synergy with Teva and the sports sandal. Again, we'll put a lot of this, our research material, out on the Substack, but you should see some of these early Teva ads. They're amazing in terms of marketing this like rugged sandal, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge contradiction.
Let's do a milestone check here, because what's in your head probably right now as you're listening to this and thinking about the key points. Organization started in 1973. We're now in 1985, where there's this partnership between Teva and Deckers. We have this amazing salesperson who's been hitting the road selling for 12 years into this company that becomes a $30 billion behemoth. And as you were just describing, selling like hotcakes, this sandal, like it's all the rage. What are the sales of this 12-year-old organization with a hotcake selling master salesperson at the helm? If you did not answer in 1986, if you did not answer $200,000, you're incorrect.
Okay, one of the things I will continue to harp on throughout this story is how amazing, and maybe this is all luck. You know, lightning can't strike 4 times, right? Yep. Maybe that's all it is. It's how amazing Doug and future management teams were identifying something when it was so small, it's not even on the radar of a Nike, Adidas, a Reebok, anybody, and ultimately turning that into something. Of course, Nike didn't send their research team out to talk to a geophysicist in the Grand Canyon that probably has duct tape on his sandals at this point. Of course he doesn't. All that happened, you told this story perfectly. Mark needed some help, and he was like, who else makes crazy sandals in the Mountain West? And, you know, like that's serendipity more than anything else at this point.
If you all have not seen the movie Air, which is a story of Nike and how it took the Jordan shoe out, go watch it. 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 54 seconds in, you will see Phil Knight send someone out to the Grand Canyon to search for a geophysicist. Or maybe it was a cutscene. I don't know. Okay, so, but isn't that bewildering? $200,000. So everything that we just mentioned, 12 years into this company, amazing salesperson, recognized niche product. Doug Otto will also say the persistence of this entrepreneur is pretty radical. But $200,000 is the sales they have in 1986. What then happens over the next 4 years is there's a doubling or more of Teva sales every year. This, at this point, is the product that Deckers has. But it's a licensing.
It's the only thing of, like, significant value. It's the only thing that foreshadows that there might be an IPO in the future. Right? The sandals, the Santa Barbara sandals were like, they could make a few bucks, right? Yeah. Like, Doug was happy to make a mission. It's funny, you go back to Nike, that's the initial sales model with Nike too, is it's like commissions and then everything else. For those who don't know, I'll take a slight detour into the economics of a growing shoe company. When you double sales every year, it sounds like a great thing. But the problem is you have to go back and place the order for double the inventory, and you don't have money to do that, right? So if your gross margins are 50% even, you take all of last year's profits to buy next year's shoes.
That's right.
And that's great until the music stops, because if you double for 10 years straight and then have 1 year where you can't sell any product, you just are sitting on a bunch of product and you actually made no revenue over that decade. You actually made no profit over that decade. Excuse me. It's a tough business.
It's a brutal business. And over this next period of time, you've got Teva, you have Mark Thatcher, you have Doug Otto and Deckers, who's a licensor of this product. So they're paying back royalties constantly to Mark Thatcher. And one of the things that makes this such a strong partnership and to lead to all the fad that you talked about is, in the words of Doug Otto, authenticity. He is legitimately a surfer looking to figure out how to make better products for them. Mark Thatcher is a river guide who made a product for that. And if you fast forward decades from this, which we'll eventually get to, that is still what both of them are doing: river rafting and surfing. It's quite amazing. Over the next few years, this Teva brand, and by the way, Teva is Hebrew word for nature, I learned in this research.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So over the next few years, you go from $200,000 in 1986 in sales. In 1990, you end up with a little over $5 million. So at this point, to what you were saying, this is where they're like, okay, we got a bit of a company now. Deckers as an organization is 17 years old. We're going on 20. We got a little bit of a company. Let's start thinking about going public. By 1992, we're now talking about almost $40 million in sales. And this is when going public becomes legit. This is also when the Teva sandal is 98%. So when we said basically all the product, it is 98% of the revenue. If you picture a company today going public, I can't imagine this today. Picture a company going public and ignore the size. It's like very small at $40 million, but also where 98% of your revenue comes from a product that you don't own.
I can't picture that.
This is the situation in which they're going public. And why I bring this up is because when we talk about the stock chart, which we're about to do, it is not positive for the next decade. And part of the reason...
Well, you're glossing over a few things. So there's a lot that happens in 1993, but there's some key stuff that happens in 1992 we need to talk about. One very key thing. And you just mentioned, I just want to make sure I heard the figures right. You said 1990 they're doing $5 million in revenues.
Yep.
And then you said 93 they're doing $40 million. So this comes off of 1985 where they're doing $200K. Right, let's just talk about the revenue chart. 85, $200K to 95 million to 93, $40 million. This is explosive growth. Thing I don't know that we'll spend much time on because I didn't come across it, but just the fact that they managed to get product into the market to sell $40 million worth of product in an 8-year stretch is incredible. Like there are some unsung heroes behind the scenes in their operations and manufacturing space that did several miracles over that 8-year stretch.
That's right. Everything that you just mentioned is right. When you were talking about the footwear space, you have to bet on your next year. So it's everything of betting your profits to then create inventory. You have to figure out where you're going to manufacture this. How do you distribute it? What retailers you're going to go into? And they have always been, and I think it's true at least through the next 15 years after what we're talking about, that they go through high-end retailers. They always view this as a high-end product. They're not competing with the small folks. So they get to this $40 million 1990.
Well, hold on. In 1992, thing happens that could potentially destroy the company. Nike says, first of all, in 1992, Deckers is advertising Teva sandals for running Doogles. That's how unique these are. They come out with a long distance model. And then Nike shows up to the space with ACG and basically is going to compete with Teva. This is where folks like Doug can either say, oh my goodness, there's actually good waves right now and I have no desire. I never dreamed of competing with Nike. They are going to crush me. Or you can say, and this is what, sorry, I don't have the name in front of me, but I think their COO at the time effectively said, Nike's here. That legitimizes the market. We are here to stay. And this is the best thing that could happen for us. This springboards us into an IPO because we could say we created the space that Nike now sees as such a valuable space that they went in on the action.
Smart. That's smart marketing.
Really good.
So you're exactly right. So you got $40 million in 1992. They go a little over $50 million in 1993, which is when they go public in October. And during this period, to go to the Nike piece, late 1992, Nike comes in, and their sales near immediately are $50 million. So I'm thinking about the mentality. Let's go to the line you just made. The mentality at this time is you're Doug Otto, 1973, you got your graduate degree, you all excited. You start this organization. Over 20 years, you slog, you grind, you inventory, and create a $50 million publicly traded business. How amazing is that? That's amazing. Nike snaps its fingers and has a $50 million business right alongside you. Killer. Yes. Killer.
Okay. I want to continue on 1993. The timeline I have up. Again, Google sent me 135 sources, so it's hard to keep all this. It's hard to keep the good stuff at my fingertips, right?
Yeah.
But here's the data I have on the IPO. They IPO at $15 per share. They called Deckers Outdoor Corporation. The ticker is DECK. And you guys know this. We say it all the time. But none of this is advice to purchase shares. Like, we're doing a company history here. It's a research recommendation. Do your own thing. We find this to be one of the most fascinating companies over the last 30 years. That's why we're talking about it, right?
Yep.
So that achieves there. I have the number for 1993 at 57.1 million in sales and 6.3 million in net earnings. Pretty solid.
Yep. Millions. Yep.
But again, Nike just shows up and basically crushes you. Is your equal by like sending some dude to make a running sandal, an outdoor sandal. Okay. Now, another really big thing. Well, there's two big There's a purchase of Simple shoes for $10,000. Do I have that right, Douglas? That's one on my notes that seems.
I didn't write down the amount. So
okay. So they get a 50% share of Simple shoes. They're IPO. This is my point. They're IPOing and they're still doing a bunch of other things and thinking about how they reduce the dependency on Teva.
And so they're branching out. They have a couple other. You mentioned Simple. They have a brand called Picante. They acquired an Alp sports sandal brand. Like their Sensei is another brand. Like they're trying to figure this out and say how do we get away from, again, this product that we are reliant upon but don't own? How do we diversify our way away from this? Let's fast forward a couple years. You can bring me back if you want. In 1994, they have $85 million in sales. Then in 1995, one of the consequential things that they do that will lead to the future growth of this organization happens. And one of the consequential things that in some ways ruins the next six years of the organization happens in that same year.
At this point, they're heavily dependent on one brand which happens to be related to sandals. I want to lead the audience to think about the seasonality of that business and how the management team might be trying to solve that. That's all I want to say.
So they're looking at these brands they have, the purchases they have, and go, we are highly reliant sales-wise on what happens in the spring, in the summer, and the wintertime. Only select parts of the globe are trying to get sandals. A winter boot would be ideal. This is the foreshadowing that Doug Otto actually had in a New York Times article in 1995. He goes, he throws it off. Maybe like a winter boot would be nice. In the background, he's having conversations with a friend of his wife. So his wife is Australian. A friend of his wife, someone named Brian Smith, also Australian, but living in California, which is where they all were. And he was selling this boot called UGG. Now, UGG, apparently, while for some reason someone gave it a trademark, is just a nickname for something that's ugly that people use in Australia. So it was called an UGG boot. And he was selling this as a way for surfers. Again, we're going back to surfing. For surfers to keep their feet warm. A sheepskin boot, highly comfortable.
Post being out in the California Ocean, I think this all matters, right?
It does.
I know this was popular in Australia, but I think it's often called an Australian company, and Brian Smith is living in California. The reason I mention that as a surfer is the water's colder. The water's cold in California. Yeah. And you're often freezing when you get out of the ocean, and you just want your feet to be warm, right? So, again, how much serendipity, how much luck takes place here? Probably a lot. But the fact that in the back of Deckers Corporation's leadership, they're like, we need to counterbalance our sales. We can't have everything dependent on March and April and how much people want sandals. You're like, we need a winter boot. And then we're already surfers. We happen to know this dude that has a winter boot that, as I remember reading it, Doug's wife was really keen on these things. She was like, these things are amazing. So that all gets packaged together to lead to an acquisition. And what happens next is nuts.
So they acquire UGG for about $15 million in 1995. Also in 1995, they say, okay, we've got these three big brands. They have the other ones I mentioned, but the three big brands now are Simple that you talked about, Teva, and UGG. How do we organize our business? We got Nike coming in. We got to figure out how to organize this business to be successful. So what they did was they had the brand split. They consolidated all the brands under one roof. So you have a marketing leader, a sales leader, etc. From an efficiency and a cost perspective, you can see how someone gets to this. But what was lost during this time was what we mentioned was so important, was authenticity. These are three different brands. You have the river rafting sports sandal brand. You've got Simple, which is like a green sustainability brand. And you have UGG, which, as you mentioned, his wife loving them, right? Surfers love it because it keeps their feet warm. It's like a high-end sheepskin comfortable boot for the ladies. Those are three different brands. Authenticity is so important. And what they lost at this point in time by consolidating is they made it into a widget factory as opposed to having the authenticity of each brand.
I mean, I just want to hammer on that. I think people forget that the folks lining up on Madison Avenue in New York City or wherever in Paris often are looking for something that feels authentic, especially when there's a premium price point. So with Teva in the late 80s, there was a story around these came straight out of the Grand Canyon river rafting guide, kind of.
Yep.
With the original Deckers flip-flops, there was a story around this is a surf bum that's making these in his garage in Santa Barbara. And I think UGG has struggled with that at times in their history. We're going to talk about the real wildfire that created UGG sales, and it was not a surfer. But this is so critical. At this point, the company starts to struggle. And I think tying it to the lack of being authentic is part of the reason for those struggles.
And from a numbers perspective, what happens is you have, in 1994, you got Teva sales. Now you got me on to Teva Tevs.
It's Teva.
Whatever it is. You have Teva sales at $69 million in 1994. If you fast forward 2 years, sales were $44 million. From $69 million to $44 million. That's not the direction you want to go with something that is, at this point, I think it was probably closer to 80-something% of sales once they have the other brands. That is not very good. One of the things that was stated about Teva specifically is that there's this New York Times article in 1998. It says, they're too good. They're too durable. Like this high-quality product has no planned obsolescence. They last forever, and they're easy to knock off. So
it's a geophysicist. It's all Mark's fault. I mean,
yes. And so you have between October 1993, when the company went public, and November of 1998, so 5 years, if you had invested $1 in this stock, you would have 91% of your money gone. You'd have 9 cents left of this stock.
Well, and let's talk about why. So you have a one-trick pony at that point. I mean, I know that happens in 1995, but as we talked about, unless you're like living in a van on a beach in California, you've never heard of UGG.
Yes. Yep. That's right.
Okay. And the inland folks can't imagine wearing Uggs at that time because literally, per the name, they're like the ugliest boot you could ever imagine.
And there was one article that said they're ugly, but they're cute.
You're talking about $1 turning into 9 cents, right? In what, a 4 or 5 year time span?
5 years.
Of course, Doogles. All your sales relates to one company that you don't even own.
Yep.
Everyone that bought the IPO at $15 a share is effectively saying, I bought it for growth. That company's now has declining sales. Nike's come into the market to destroy you. I mean, I actually don't have this in front of me. I don't know if you do. But this stock is now trading around $2 a share or something? I mean,
something like that. Yeah.
How low does this thing go? For the record, although I forget if there's splits involved, but at the end of 2024, when we looked at this and made the decision to review Deckers Outdoor Corporation, the stock was hovering around $200 a share. You could pick this thing at $2, but this is what I always say. there's a reason you could buy this thing at $2, and you'd almost have to be an idiot to be like, this thing is going to go 100x over the next 30 years. There's nothing, there's no facts that would lead you to believe that.
And what often happens when you have stories like that is things just get worse. Things pile on.
Oh, like 95% of the time. I mean, the downward spiral is tough to reverse.
And this was one of those times. So now we're in 1998. Things are in the crapper. 77% of revenue is coming from Teva. You've got these fledgling other brands that are popular in their niche, but not quite hopping yet. Then you get sued. There was a woman that comes out of the woodwork. I think literally she came out of the woodwork. Like I feel sorry for this human. Her last name was Strong. For some reason, I didn't write down her first name. I think it might have been Linda.
Molly Strong.
Molly. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it was Yeti by Molly was this brand. And this was a product that Deckers stopped selling in 1995, but it came back to haunt them. She sues them because she says, this is my product. Why are you selling this thing? She claims that the lawsuit left her poor and homeless. She's like, I don't have a job. There's this big old company. I'm just a little lady, 55 years old. What the heck's going on? This lawsuit ends up costing Deckers over $5 million over the next few years, which was a big deal to them at this point in time. Because even though they had $102 million in sales in 1998, they lost $3 million.
Yeah, I mean, they're losing money, and they're not big enough. They're not a $1 billion corporation. Like, $5 million is a very meanable. If they made $5 million, they'd be celebrating that profit. And now, on top of losing $3 million, they have to pay out $5 million.
And when push comes to shove, that product, Teva, that's 80% of their revenue. Mark Thatcher says, our licensing agreement's coming up in a couple years. You know what? And I think I'm going to take my business elsewhere. What in the heck do you do at this point in time? You have a stock that has lost over 90% of its value, and it's done this. Remember, this is 1998, people. It's done this when all you had to do was have a dream and a prayer, and your stock would double. That's all that you had to do. You had to not have a real business.
If you owned like Teva.com at this point, it would be worth $7 billion. This is a .com bubble. People are leading into it.
But if you're licensing Teva.com, not good. So Mark Thatcher comes out and says, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. They've had this exclusive licensing agreement right at this point for going on 15 years. And Deckers is like, what the heck are we going to do? So now we come into the new century. In the year 2000, or 1999, but starting the year 2000, Deckers goes, okay, all right, cool. We're going to get you to sign an agreement, right? So they gave Teva an exclusive worldwide rights through December 2011. So they extend that fully. Deckers also at this point now has the option to buy. They put that into the contract. They have the option to buy. So now they have the ability to turn this licensing agreement into a full purchase agreement. Things start to turn around a little bit at this point. And let me tell you what that means stock-wise. So I told you in November of 1998, that was the trough. That was the point where you were down 91%. Finally, you start to get a little bit of your mojo back. So from November 1998, when that $1 that you invested would have been 9 cents. By this point, by the turn of the century, you're now looking at that 9 cents being about 15 to 20 cents. So you've doubled.
Yeah.
You've doubled.
I bought a company that was definitely going bankrupt, and I doubled my money. Yeah.
Yeah. And it stays around that stock level for the next 3 years. But magic started taking place over that next 3 years. During that period of time, remember those ugly boots? Well, the person that takes over UGG says, okay, we're going to start pushing the premium element of UGG. They start shipping UGG out to A-list celebrities. So you see Kate Hudson wearing UGG, etc. And the human of all humans, the mother of all marketing campaigns.
You want to go? You want to go there?
I think we have to.
That's a big turning point. I want to talk about a few other things because What year are you in right now? I want to talk about a few other things in 2002.
Okay. That's the period I'm in. I'm taking the period of 2000 to 2003 right now. So anything in there is fair game.
All right. So November 25th, if my notes are right, is they officially acquire Teva.
Yep.
the patents, the trademarks, the assets. That's huge. I have $60-ish million. Okay, this is something that in retrospect, in our seats, it's like this should have happened on both sides much sooner than 2002. But that gives some certainty around, okay, we've partnered with this company and Mark for almost 2 decades. Like, let's just bring it in-house, bring it publicly traded, and take that level of uncertainty off. That, when we talk about a springboard for the stock, I think that foundational piece is a really big deal.
Yep. And this literally saves the company. The 2 things we're about to mention save the company, because this is a point in time when you're obviously going to have people with hostile takeovers and whatnot that are going to try and come in because it's so cheap. But at this point, your company has assets, because before, your asset was this contract for a licensing agreement that someone else actually owns the product.
Yes.
At this point, you're no longer kicking out the part of your profit for royalty sales. Like, now you own all of that. Your direct sales that you're making, you own all of that. It goes to the bottom line. Again,
a really critical point, right? So when you pay the $62 million, you own every aspect of it.
That's right.
You get to keep the entire revenue stream. It's really good. So that, it's the Kate Hudson piece you mentioned. Now, I thought she found UGG organically. Was that placed with her? Do we know?
It's hard to know exactly, but from what I saw, it seemed like it was placed with her.
Okay.
That's what it seemed like.
Well, props to the people at Deckers Outdoor.
Yep.
Good work.
Yep. But who
now
knows?
You
who
can
knows?
go.
Okay. So we got the one thing that you mentioned that happened. You acquire the company that you built your company on. Smart. Like, who would have thought? Business textbook, page 3. So you do that. And then next, you have Oprah Winfrey puts the UGG boots on the show, says, go buy these. And you have the combination of all the celebs that had been wearing these, looking all good on the streets. And Oprah says, go get this. Now you have a real company that you can start to build off of. I'm going to mention one thing, and then we can come back to this point in time. So, well, actually, I'm going to mention 2 things. I'm going to go outside of my 2003 point and say that, remember that $1 that you put into the stock when it went public? It again becomes $1 in 2004. So about a decade later, you get back to even. And at this point in time, there's the decision for Doug Otto to step down as CEO. And they bring someone named Angel Martinez in, who starts in 1995. So decision made in 1994. He starts in 1995. I state this because, one, this is the beginning of the period that we talk about, the last 20 years of how the company's performed. The other thing, from an emotional standpoint, that I don't know how Doug Otto exactly was feeling at this point in time, but effectively, this is 30 years after you start this company. A little over a decade after you start it, you find the river guide, Teva. You build this company, you grind, it starts growing, hotcakes, till you get to the IPO. After the IPO, it's another grind. You find a couple other brands that you believe in that are authentic to you. The stock is getting hammered. You get sued. Your partner for a decade plus says that they're going to go and try and go elsewhere. Finally, you get this back to a place where you go, whew, cool. And then you're replaced. Meaning, he might replace himself.
Yeah.
But,
well, so meaning get back to IPO prices.
Get back to IPO prices. Yeah. Yes. You have a strong foundation back at IPO prices. And what I'm curious about with Doug Otto is whether at this point, all those things that I said, if he goes, you know what? I've done all this and it's just time for me. Or if there's a part that's like, I don't get to see the next chapter. I don't get to run the next chapter, I should say. I could see so many mixed emotions right there because it has been a grind. 30 years.
But this is why surfers rule the world, Doogles, at least in my history. Yeah. The thing I love about founding a business that's not entirely about profits, where it's more complex than that in terms of why you initially started the business and why you probably have continued to run the business, is I would like to think it's easier for him to kind of step away. But I don't know. Again, Doug, come on the show. We want to talk to you about that. I want to rewind to UGG and Oprah. But are you ready to do that? That's such a critical thing.
Let's do it.
So I was double checking my notes over here because I want to make sure I have this right. We went all the way to 2003, really. But the first thing related to UGG and Oprah is actually 2000. In the year 2000, she features the UGG boot on her Christmas show.
Yep.
And reportedly gave 350 pairs to staff. Yep. This is a male, an Australian living in California. Surf boot. I don't know how Oprah ever gets her hands on the thing. The fact that she does is a minor miracle. But basically over the next 8 years, Oprah frequently endorses the UGG boot with at least no reported
That's exactly right.
reason for that. She just likes the thing. Okay? That could be the single most important advocate, individual, supporting this shoe brand. It could be the only reason this shoe brand is a multi-billion-dollar asset.
Yeah. It's between that and what you mentioned with Teva. Like, now has a... If you say the Teva purchase, let's say, it legitimizes the financials and the assets of the organization, and it makes something possible. And then Oprah becomes the catalyst for the next big brand. Because Teva at this point is not going to be the next big brand. Teva is not going to be the way that they go like 10x from this point. But they needed to do that. Oprah becomes the catalyst for the next one.
Yes. And the other slight detour I'm going to take here, listen to the how I built this if you're interested. But for those who don't know, the founder of Lululemon is also a surf bum named Chip Wilson, who had no desire to create athleisure pants. His first product was like these baggy short things, specifically for skating and surfboard. It's amazing how this beach culture tends to end up with the Oprahs of the world and then tends to become these massive companies. Just amazing to me. And I don't know if it's authenticity or what. I don't know why that seems to have happened so frequently. Maybe it's just a counterculture thing, but fascinating. Yeah. Surfers rule the world. Okay. I think in 2003, they're working on establishing like quality manufacturing and sourcing for sheepskin that comes with UGG. We're going to talk about the challenges that having a 100% sheepskin boot demands. And at this point, in late 2003, well, you already talked about Doug Otto being replaced, but there was some discussion about a possible sale of the company.
There was. This is the hostile. I breezed over it. I said, of course you're going to get hostile takeovers, but I didn't actually say that there was an attempt. You're right.
Okay. So then I have late 2003, I have UGG boot sales at approximately $32 million, up from basically $24 million. And Teva sales at $75 million, up from $65 million. That's good. That's a wrap for part one, the first 30 years of Deckers Outdoor Corporation. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Here's the deal. We're going to come back next week and break down from 2004 on. This is where the stock performance truly becomes a best in class, one of the 10 best performing stocks during this time period. We are talking about next week more UGG, absolutely. More Teva, absolutely. The transition from Doug Otto to future managements, and this upstart running company that literally takes the world by storm, referred to as Hoka. The original name, Hoka Una Una. The acquisition cost, you're going to be shocked at how tiny, how small. Some money fell out of the board of directors' pockets. And they
accidentally bought a company.
And then leveraged the foundational relationships that they built to explode this thing into something new, to create a multi-billion-dollar entity that is truly a fascinating company. So come back for that next week.
And that builds that point. It builds off of what we mentioned in the intro when we were talking about niche, like that purchase price. It's like they find things that are like super niche and relatively cheap when they pick them up and then take it to the next level. One other thing, that we didn't mention, I know in the intro, that you've heard in this episode is how much luck and serendipity there is in corporate stories all the time, and it gets glossed over. But how the heck do you find a geophysicist river guide? Like, who is that guy that you build your company off of?
I wish I knew. Here's the deal. The reason Deckers is one of the best performing stocks of the recent past is because they've found a way to get lightning to strike at least 3 times. So that goes to, is it completely luck?
Yeah.
Or what percentage of luck and serendipity is it versus what percentage of skill? I honestly don't know, but that's why it's a great company to talk about. Guys, if you have questions specifically about part 1 of the episode or anything else relating to these amazing shoe brands or this amazing company, shoot us an email, skippydoogles@gmail.com, and we'll try and weave that into the next episode. Talk to you next week.
Thank you.